Perfect. I know that people are still coming in from the keynote, but I want to be the first to welcome and thank you for joining us for our panel discussion, Starting Your AI Journey. Very quickly, before we get started with the session, I do want to detail just some general guidelines. This should be review, but for any of you who are joining us later in the day, please keep your camera off. All of the sessions are recorded, so we do want to ensure that our panelists are front and center, so please keep your camera off. Additionally, you will not have access to use your microphones. However, in the Q&A section, if you have a really great question that you'd like to ask out loud, we can use the raise your hand feature, and I can enable your microphone so that you can ask your question. That brings me to the most important point here. The chat is the best place to utilize communication with our panelists today. So any questions, comments, anything like that that you may have, the chat panel is the best place to put those comments and questions. I'm going to kick it right over to Judy because I know we have a ton of awesome comments and content for today, and I will let her take it away.
Thanks so much, Josh. So I'm really excited today to host this discussion as we start talking about starting out your AI journey. We've got a great panel here with Firas Hamza from Microsoft. He's the Director of Digital Health Innovation Strategy in the CTO office. Brian Hart, who's the Chief Revenue Officer from Delta Dental Kentucky. Aaron Peabody, who's the founder and CTO of Untitled firm. And as we can go ahead and drop the slide now, if you don't mind, Josh. And as we start to kick this off, I'd like to really encourage everybody to post comments and questions into the chat because we would really like to keep this interactive and encourage you to participate in the discussion. And we want to make sure that we make this as meaningful as possible to all of the audience that's out there. So Brian, I'm going to start with you, if that's all right, and tell us a little bit from the business owner's perspective. What do you think were some of the biggest pieces as you thought about digital transformation? What were some of the biggest problems that you were looking to solve as you started to move towards this AI journey?
Judy, inside of Delta Dental of Kentucky, which is a dental insurance company, we have a wholly owned subsidiary that sells direct-to-consumer packaged goods worldwide, not just in Kentucky. And so the challenges that we have in terms of how do we market those products and what channels do we use? And when I pose these questions to the team, they're like, we use all channels, where omni-channel is the kind of the buzzword, and that, you know, that sounds exhausting. And how do you track and understand and adapt to know what works? And so if I looked at a pie of how our team was spending their time, half would be doing the work, and then half of that time would be on reporting on how the work was performing. And so I've often heard that change is either born out of inspiration or desperation. And for me, it was out of desperation initially. And as I was sharing these struggles with Aaron at Untitled, he said, well, I think there might be a better way. And so that really was the impetus for our journey, and the types of problems that we were trying to solve is how do we evaluate what programs were working and conversely what weren't working, and how, knowing that we're spending thousands of dollars a day on various marketing programs across multiple channels, how do we quickly adapt and change? And so the need for information and have that information real time to evaluate effectiveness and how we're acquiring and finding new customers is really important to the success of our business. And so that's been, probably the key sort of 1B to that answer would be dispersion of information. So when I mentioned that time spent of aggregating or summarizing information across various programs and what's working, I'm not always the best person to make those decisions. And so how do we disperse this information across all of these verticals out into the teams so that they have visibility across all of the channels, not just one person or a small group of folks, to help us make better decisions and be more nimble in those decisions. And so those were the kind of the two key business problems that we were trying to solve. How do we attract customers and evaluate our programs more effectively? And then also just the dispersion of information out into the team so that they're more equipped to evaluate and make decisions maybe outside of even their particular area of expertise. And that's helped us adapt faster, and I think in the long run save money in terms of how we use our marketing spend to grow the business.
That's great. I think you outlined some really key and important things that are important, that help drive the business success, right? So if we look at it, then Aaron, as you started to step in and Brian was discussing this with you, how did you start to take this from a solution perspective and help work with Brian and his team to find the right approach to solving the problem and getting them started? Because you don't just say, oh, here, I've got the whole solution already put together and throw it at them and walk away, and 2 days later, all problems are solved, right? It's not that easy.
No, unfortunately, it's not that easy. And typically speaking as well, if that is your approach, chances are pretty good that you're not going to be kept around for a while. So the reality is, I think that a lot of successful digital transformation strategy is very empathy driven. You're entering into like shared experiences with people, and you're inviting a lot of change and at one time, right? And that can be really tough. So to be honest with you, in many respects, Brian and I have to be both the patient and the doctor to each other, right? And throughout this entire journey that we've been on, because we've been working together for about 2 years now, that is constantly happening, right? And so in terms of getting started, it's hearing out Brian on, the needs, right? And there's some obvious solutions to those needs based upon, what you're hearing, right? So like when he says, hey, I need to see all of this information in one place. Well, you can solve that with some data warehousing and, attaching a business intelligence tool to that data warehouse, right? That allows us to see all this data in one place. But like, what does that, really mean, right? What does an actionable report look like? What's the information you need to live by? What is irrelevant, et cetera? And, despite being kind of on this journey for 2 years with each other, I think Brian and I would both say that we're still very much learning, right? We're learning how to operate in each other's businesses and within the framework of a digital transformation strategy, because it's going to be unique, to the company that's undergoing it. And for me, I have to be, a temporary citizen of Delta Dental as much as I possibly can to really understand the business problems.
That's great. I think you held that out really well, because it is a lot about understanding the customer's business problem and not just throwing technology at them. So you outlined that well. So Firas, from your perspective, as you work with a wide variety of customers in a larger vertical, are you seeing that this is pretty common as people start to look at these problems, the business problem, and putting together solutions? Are they unique in how they approach this, or what would you say from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I want to start with our mission at Microsoft. So our mission at Microsoft is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. That's our goal. So when we look at AI and digital transformation, a lot of times, when we talk with our customers, you have, either maximization problem or optimization problem. And the way we look at it at Microsoft, we look at, when we replace these repetitive tasks using AI and machine learning, is that we want to amplify the human ingenuity. So, by deploying these, machine learning models, for example, we're going to be able to identify, predict patterns, and we're going to provide systems with human-like capabilities of language understanding, like speech, and vision, for example. And when the global pandemic hit us last year, it acted as a time machine, and accelerated us into the future, and increased the technology adoption. So we saw last year, for example, we saw 2 years worth of digital transformation into 2 months. You saw things like telehealth. We've been talking about telehealth for years, and when the global pandemic hit, all of a sudden everyone started doing telehealth. And so same thing happened in 2008 when we had the global recession. All of a sudden, automation became very important after that. And so when you look at AI, you look at problems where you're trying to solve. So you start with the problem, and we start looking at solutions like, for example, COVID-19 health bot system checker. So instead of going to the hospital and they ask you all these questions and you expose other people, you deploy a chat bot, and the CDC use the health bot that we built, to look at your symptoms and diagnose you, and then based on that, we'll come up with a suggestion that you need to go to the hospital, or or you're fine, or you need to quarantine, etc. So these are kind of solutions that we started with, when the COVID hit. But then you look at other more important, more bigger solutions. So when we look at them, you look at problems, for example, we were talking about, and how you can create real-time solutions. And when you look at these problems, you need to look at the strategy, you need to look at the culture, you need to look at the organizational structure and the core capabilities. And when you look at them holistically, all of them together, and utilize a framework. We have a framework, we call it the AI maturity model. That AI maturity model will help you assess your organizational maturity level, and based on that, we can work with you and build a capability together. But also you need to look at other areas too when you talk about AI. It's not just like, here's the solution, you mentioned that, this is not just the technology problem. You need to look at the education level within that organization. So you look at reskilling programs. You need to give the employees the tools, to learn about AI, to learn about ML. And Microsoft, we developed the AI Business School. I highly, highly encourage everyone to go and check it out online. Just look it up. And the AI Business School will give you all the tools, and based on your level, and we'll give you recommended courses. But also look at that human-centric approach. What are you trying to solve, and how we can help that, build that solution to make it more inclusive, and how is that going to help humanity? At the same token, you need to look at the ethics of AI, which is critical here. You need to look at the data privacy, who got access. You look at the data bias, and you need to look at it, all of it together holistically, so you can develop that solution that's going to be appropriate for your organization.
Thank you. I think you kind of did a nice segue into our next topic here, which is getting prepared for this journey. And so, you talked a little bit about preparing your people and looking a lot at what's going on and kind of where everybody sits and where they are from a skill perspective and starting to get them ready. But Brian, I'm wondering what type of preparation you had to do within your organization to get the mindset ready for this big of a change. Because there's a lot of people that are very stuck in, this is the way we always did things. Why do we need to change? I'm not comfortable with this change. Did you have a lot of that going on, do you think?
We still do. And so I love that this is called the AI journey. So even though we've been on this for a while, we're still in some regards in an infancy stage. Some are more advanced, but and it varies by individual. For me and for our organization, there were two things that helped. First is, I'm a huge fan of beginning with the end in mind. So clearly defining the business problem that we want to solve, and starting with something that we could, that we felt was achievable, like a small win or something that we might refer to. That also helped when you terms of getting buy-in and commitment. If everyone agrees this is an issue, then you have something that you feel like is solvable. then we're able to dedicate resources to it, both financially and from a human capital standpoint, to set out to solve that problem. Then once we have that small win, it starts to snowball from there, and people start to see the potential. And it doesn't mean there are setbacks, but if we started, when we try to start too big or too wide of a scope, then that's when it's a very like, okay, I give up, this is too hard, or there's too much change. So it is all about people and change management and biting off problems that you feel like that are important, obviously, but that you can solve. And then I also think this is important for us, and it may not be for everyone. And even though we may have felt like we had some of the capabilities internally, we're really ingrained in our existing processes and technologies and structures, and we tend to just see the barriers that are in play. And so choosing an outside partner that helped us on this journey, that could, allow our folks to still maintain the focus on their day-to-day job while we partnered with someone who helped tie some of this data together for us, was really important to help us leapfrog and kind of circumvent the existing organizational inertia that that was in place. And so that's what got us started on the journey, and having some quick or smaller projects that we could actually deliver on. That's what helped gain momentum and buy-in to help us start dreaming about bigger challenges and bigger problems that we hope to solve in the future.
That's great. I think those are all really good insights. And Aaron, as you start to fit in there and you look at it from more of the project perspective, right, and bringing that solution to bear, but how do you typically approach helping customers with that whole change management approach and understanding how to fit it in? Because there's an art to it, right? It's not something that you can just shove something in there and say, okay, now all of you adjust and expect your project to be successful. We all know that doesn't work well.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And I think part of it too is working with the executive sponsor like Brian on what is our lowest common denominator that we have to serve right now, right? What is the overall gap that we're dealing with? But I think in reality, you have to, as Brian said, you have to identify the low-hanging fruit, right? And that's really important because if you give somebody a new tool and it really does serve their need, they will buy in and they will learn on their own, right? If they're excited about the new technology, you don't have to worry about their learning curve so much, right? Now, they may ask you, how do you do this? Can you push this button, et cetera? And right, this is all part of the training that we regularly facilitate when we bring a new solution to Delta Dental, right? But at the same time, the flip side of that is, okay, so what do you do if someone's not excited, right? Or someone's really struggling and whatnot. And I don't know if we really have a magic equation for that. Because in many respects, I think we're also still learning how to do that really well with different folks at DDKY. And so the most important thing for me to do and really for Brian to do once change is in motion is largely to ensure that people are excited and that their needs are being met. And then folks will go through the learning curve, whether it be on their own or just through some dedicated hands-on training because of that excitement, right? If you don't have that, though, it's tough. Like it really is difficult. And I couldn't sit up here and say that we've totally perfected that yet. But that's generally speaking how I think about it. If someone's excited to learn or excited about something new, learning is just kind of like a natural byproduct of it because they want to play with fire for the first time, or they want to see what's possible. But until you introduce excitement into the equation and also give people the bandwidth and room to make mistakes and fail, this is always going to be a struggle.
Judy, may I add on to that just quickly?
Absolutely.
What I found is that folks aren't obstinate by nature. They want this to work and they want things to make their lives easier and to help them be more successful in their roles. Where I think things tend to fall apart is a new tool or solution could be introduced and then it's like walk away. And I think most people just want to felt understood and heard. And so are we approaching those problems and issues with an eye towards what are we not giving them for this solution not to work? And so I just couldn't stress more the idea, and you had hinted at this, Judy, towards the beginning, is this journey, like you don't just show up and drop this off and take off. This is something where you have to have a partnership, or however whether that's external or internal partnership, that is managed in an ongoing way. So, because you're not going to get it right. If this is the first time, the second, third, we're 2 years in and we still don't have it right. Like it's a continual journey of improving and trying to get a little bit better. But our experience has been that as long as people feel like their voices are heard and that we're responding to their, hey, I think this could make it better, or this is what I need for it to work for me, as long as they felt heard and that we're being accountable to those changes, they stay committed and bought in. And then as those changes come to fruition, they feel even more a part of the solution. And that's what generates over time the excitement, particularly for those that may not feel that excitement at the outset.
I love that, Brian, because I think as we're all talking about these things, what's at the heart of everything are people. And it's really easy to get caught up in the technology and the coolness of what we're able to do, but people are what we're trying to work with. And, you know, in your business in particular, your customers are people, right? And that's who you're taking care of. And your goal is to provide better service to your people. The goal at Microsoft is to empower people, right? And Aaron's business goal is to take good care of his clients, who are people. And sometimes we forget that in our technology worlds. And so we've got to sometimes bring ourselves back around to it. So I think you just very eloquently reminded us all of that, which was really important. As we start to look at this overall, we've heard Brian talk a little bit and Aaron talk a little bit about some of the challenges. And Firas, I'm wondering about, from your, kind of bigger world perspective, what do you think are some of the big challenges that maybe hold people back or can be blockers sometimes as they get into these projects? Things that they should be aware of and start thinking about?
Great question. I think many times that you hear all these buzzwords, like a few years ago we had big data, and everyone was talking about it. And, now we have AI and there is a lot of excitement about it. But what does it mean? What are we trying to solve? And I think if we look at that, from that point of view, I think it will be really, really helpful, because the AI cannot be the solution for everything. And I think some organizations approach this as an experiment, or a one-off, without having a complete strategy around it, without changing the culture, without training their people and really get everyone on the same mission. I think sometimes you see fear. You think about AI, and when I say AI, I'm not talking about killer robots here, right? We're not talking about Terminator. We're talking about, getting through thousands of CT scans, trying to find a pattern, for example, or an anomaly within that pattern. And I think the challenge that we see sometimes with organizations is that, depending on their maturity level, and Brian, mentioned that earlier. Great point, Brian, because I think the expectation from that organization, or expectation from that team that's working on AI, can be different based on your maturity level. So, and I mentioned earlier the AI maturity model that we have, the framework we have at Microsoft, because we divided organizations into 4 separate groups. We have the maturity level on a foundational level, approaching, aspirational, and mature. We work with sometimes really mature organizations, and you could look at them, from the number of data scientists they have within their teams, the reporting structure, the culture within that organization. And then you look at it, that organizations, they are just getting started, so they have wrong expectations. They want to jump into front of the line, and they want to start with really, really complicated solutions without having the foundational layer, for example, without having the data. When you talk about machine learning models, you need a lot of data. So you have your data in silos, and not really available for you. So you need to be able to digest this data and start ingesting it into the cloud to build the ML models. So when you look at it, and you look at the maturity level within your organization, if I look at them and if they are doing analytics, okay, it's like, okay, they're on the foundational level, they're building analytics capabilities. If you look at it, they are start optimizing their processes, then okay, they're approaching that AI model, and they're a little bit cautious. They're not going, doing crazy stuff yet, and they're not experimenting, with the really complex problems. And then you look at it, the organizations with the advanced data culture. So when you look at them, they really move from the silos, the data, and they start building really mature. They have a mature data modernization process where they moved all the legacy systems into the cloud and start making the data available for their data scientists. And then when you look at very mature organizations that really they understand the model lifecycle and management for their applications, for their data, they have their foundational data architecture in place. So I think it's really, really important that for organizations where they are working on AI and they're trying to solve problems is really to gauge that maturity level. And based on that, build an action plan. If you're foundational, then go look for partners. Doesn't have to be Microsoft. But bring a partner to help you. Accelerate that growth and so on. And build that core capabilities within your organization. Train your people so your people wouldn't be afraid to take on the new technology and new tasks and new challenges.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious, Brian, as you look back over where you've gone so far in the journey, you talked a little bit about how important it is to get some small wins along the way, but have you had any moments where you said, wow, this is telling me right here, this was the right choice we made, we're really on the right track, I'm so glad we're doing this? Can you think of any times that really stand out in your mind?
Yeah, so there were a few key insights from our kind of analytics dashboard that allowed us to view our marketing programs across multiple channels, that allowed us to much more quickly, like same day, adjust how we were spending money, that helped optimize kind of our return on investment, that made us feel like that we were responding to what the market was saying in a much more condensed manner than we ever have before. And so that has allowed us, and now it's just a fabric of how we do business. Like every day's a quick stand-up where we look at how are we performing, and then we make adjustments that day. And so that cycle of having information and being able to make decisions has been so greatly shortened from where we have been, that it's allowed us to kind of optimize the programs that we're doing, which, it's not hard to make that translation into what that means in terms of profitability and just overall efficiency of the team's time and our resources. So very specifically in how we're able to garner insights into the business faster and pivot to things that aren't working, and conversely stop those that aren't working. We're just much faster and responsive in making those, adapting to that change.
That's awesome, because that is the perfect description of what you're supposed to be doing with the data transformation process. I mean, that's exactly the goal, right? To be able to look at the data and let it help you drive you to business success and better performance, and not have to wait and be reactive to old information from several months ago. So
I would say, Judy, we've talked a lot about the human component, and I mentioned this earlier, but in that same example, our team, I feel like our team feels more fulfilled in their roles because now they have those same access to the same information to be able to offer input and make decisions that helps their role feel more fulfilling or expanded than before. And so the collaboration that occurs really removes any organizational or existing hierarchy that might have been before. And it levels that playing field for anyone to feel like they can make meaningful contributions and changes to how we go to market. And that's a really important point from a people and a career perspective, fulfillment.
It really, truly is. Yeah, that's really a game changer for your entire organization then. Starts to change the entire culture.
Oh, we agree.
Yeah. So Aaron, as you think about it from helping to drive that excitement that you were talking about that helps contribute to the change, are these the types of things that you were referring to?
Yeah. It's actually a little bit humbling. I haven't heard it like that from Brian before, so appreciate those words. And the reality is that we play a pretty small part in that process, right? I don't want to live in a world where people are held back from fulfilling work or the ability to use information to make really good decisions in real time, just because someone doesn't know how to attach Power BI to AWS Redshift, right? That's such a simple thing, that we can totally remove that barrier for them, and build these dashboards, and then it's like we have a whole new level playing field, as Brian has mentioned. And so for me, the fact that like the work that we can do can have that type of impact on someone's day-to-day role at Delta Dental is, kind of breathtaking almost. It's very humbling just because, for us to be an organization that can remove those types of barriers, it's really exciting. And so in terms of generating the excitement, I guess, it's just a natural byproduct of opening up the lanes for someone to really become who they always wanted to become in the roles that they fulfill at a company like Delta Dental.
Well, and I think that Aaron, your role is, if I can say this, is the enabler, right? Your role is to help them think it through, to facilitate the discussions, to help them. You're not telling them how to run their business. You're helping them bring out the key elements and helping them put the vision in place. But they're the ones that put together the vision, right? But you're helping them draw it out, and then helping them to implement it and make it a reality.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, we're catalysts, right? But we're not the whole formula, and that's a great spot to be, right? And that's it goes back to my earlier comment just about being a temporary citizen of this business. It's really just our job to see, right? And then from what we see and what we hear, recommend solutions, stand those up, and then watch them take. And then as we iterate through that solution that's been implemented, adjust it accordingly. And now that we might be saving time, for example, on insight garnering from data that maybe previously took 20, 30 days to wrangle to make a decision. Well, think about like what that does for freeing up just like the mental bandwidth to think about new opportunities, right? Or to see, what else could be innovative, or to just really like, expound upon and further enhance the experience that you provide for your customers. You don't have bandwidth to do those types of things if you're running around just looking, for the data to let you know if something worked or didn't work, right? And so in terms of like enabling someone to, to really think about innovation and to really, seek for new opportunity, it is a necessity in many respects to remove those barriers. And if we're a catalyst for that as a partner, that's beyond exciting for me. It's really, really fun to do it. I think it's probably the most fulfilling part of the whole job.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So Firas, as we're looking at it, Microsoft is big on partner relationships, obviously. And when they look at supporting a customer like Brian's organization go through this journey, they'll typically have information out there so that if Brian had his own technology team that was able to build out all of this, there'd be information available that they can use. But they also encourage them to work with a partner such as Aaron's team, right? And from what you've seen, how would you say that the best, I think they've given a good example of a partner and relationship, but what are you seeing in terms of how organizations can best start on this journey and talking with, getting some help from somebody and looking at how to approach this? How do they get started looking for the right partner and getting going on this? What would you say is good advice for somebody?
This is a really good question, Judy. I think if we take a step back and look at the, AI and the solutions around it, I think it's really, really important to look at the ethics side of AI and the data privacy. I think it's critical. We at Microsoft, we have a strong compliance and regulations in place to protect the data, and really strong guide rails in place. So I think as a customer, my recommendation is for you to look at the news and look at the headlines, because I think it's really important, to look at what kind of ethics and compliance and regulations that you have in place. And Microsoft been leading that effort, and we have the Ether committee that's in charge of AI at Microsoft, and we have external members that actually they work in our committee, and we are part of other global committees as well. So we want to make sure that it's not just the tech companies that control the ethics and AI, and so look at it holistically. And we at Microsoft, we have a strong ecosystem of partners, and we are as strong as our partners. So I personally work with our partners on a regular basis and on daily basis, with our customers. There are a lot of things our partners are really strong at. They can hit the ground running, and they are there, they're local, they're available to our customers, and they have the relationships, and they understand the ins and outs of that business because they've been there for a long, long time. And so we rely heavily on our partners, and we make sure they are successful, and we support them going forward. Because nobody can do this alone. Not Microsoft, not Amazon, not Google. We all need to work together, on that journey. So I hope that answer your question.
Yeah, I think it's just as we're looking at people starting out on their AI journey, it's easy sometimes to feel overwhelmed and feel like, wow, I'd love to do this, but there's so much out there and I don't even know how to get started. And sometimes the best way to get started is to find somebody to help you along that path. But if you had perhaps one piece of advice for someone starting on the journey right now, what might you tell them, Brian, as kind of a way to get started and get that first step forward?
I thought that Firas put things well in terms of their framework, and the foundational to the second step. I think the third was aspirational. And for me, and I think he put what I was saying into that framework. So for us, that we were in a foundational stage, and so we chose a problem that was appropriate for being in a foundational stage, and that allowed us to achieve some success. So I think that's, to get started, that would be my first point, which is understand where you are in that framework. And I didn't know the framework existed, but intuitively, I think that's where we knew where we were at the beginning, and choose a problem that you feel like you can solve that corresponds to where you are as an organization. And I think that sets you up for success. And then as we've gone on this journey and still on it, I think the problems we think about now are way bigger than 2 years ago, because now we have some experience under us, some capabilities with us that allow us to dream bigger than before, and they feel more realistic or achievable. Than it's easy to just say or dream up things, but it's different when they're rooted in some tether of reality, because you have some experience under you. And so I think the second to get started, and we've hit on this a couple of ways, is don't be afraid to look outside and ask for help. And because I believe that we're all ingrained in sort of the whatever processes or systems that are used to run an organization, and they're really important and they're mission critical, and people aren't sitting around looking for something new to do generally. And so being able to access external partners to help you get started, and then you may build capabilities internally or so forth, or take them over at some point. But I think looking external and to feel, it depends on the problems and things that you want to solve. But I think most people would be surprised to say that when you reach out and look for partners, that again, depending on the problem you're solving, it doesn't have to, break the bank account to get going. And so you can get started with an external partner that has expertise, and they may have some of those partners, should have some of those partnerships in place that, like Firas was already talking about. And so leverage expertise that's there, and that can help you build some momentum, and as you continue to learn and evaluate what's right long-term for your own organization. But I think using external help to get going and get out of the starting block, because there is so much there that can feel overwhelming. And this is a way to make some initial progress and get some organizational buy-in.
Great. So Aaron, I'm going to toss the same question to you. If you had a piece of advice for someone getting started on their AI journey, what would it be?
So I do want to just kind of like append on to that comment, because I think one thing that might be missing is just like the criteria by which you evaluate bringing in a partner. And this is not a pitch for Untitled. I would say this is just, best practice for anybody that's actually looking, to hire a firm like ours. One thing is, like, when you talk to this partner, are they asking questions about your business and the people that work at it, or are they just asking about the technologies that you have, right? And if it's the latter, then that's probably a red flag, right? Because they're probably not going to have empathy towards the technologies that they actually introduce into your business. They're really looking for, is there's some things that we can clean up, right? And they're not thinking about those services being rendered as like a value-driven component of working with the organization. The second piece is, as Brian said, like bringing capabilities in-house. Does the partner jump at that, right? Do they see that as, threatening territory? Well, the reality is, like, if you think about, how, like, it should really be, is the partner should help you, find the path, right, as a starting point, and they should continue to be a pathfinder going forward, meaning that the previous things that partner may have introduced into the environment, it should be their job to help you secure that, so that you can keep moving forward, right? And so for me, one of the most exciting days that this, past year, or whatever it may be, Brian introduced me to a new analyst that they had hired, and he's sharp, and I was pumped that we had this person join, because the reality is now I have another person there that can secure previous work that we've done. And so now we get to keep moving forward as they build those capabilities in. So really, that would be like the two things in terms of the criteria by which you're evaluating a partner. First, are they asking good questions about your business? Do they really like care about learning about your business and the people that work at it? And the second thing is, are they defensive of territory that might threaten their ability to render services for you, right? Do they jump at the idea of someone saying, I think we need to bring some of these capabilities in-house, or do they encourage you to do it jump in and say, hey, I'll help you hire those people because we're looking out on the horizon. And for us to get there, we need to secure the base camp behind us that, you know, we just constructed. And I think that's really, really important.
Great advice. Great advice. Because
Yeah,
you're really
Judy,
looking at, oh, go ahead. Firas.
yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add great point, Aaron, that mentioned about the partners, but also I wanted to add is that, you know, when your partner develop these solutions, you know, you need to look at these solutions, you know, holistically, you know, yeah, and you look at, again, you know, at Microsoft, we're really, really big on privacy and security, which is critical when you build these systems. So you need to look at the history of that partner, what kind of solutions they developed, and also the design of these solutions. You know, Brian mentioned the human centric approach, and you know, the people. You know, when you design AI solutions, so these solutions, they really have to be inclusive. You know, you design it for everyone. You know, you design it for your Grammy, and also, you know, for your digital native users. So, you know, make sure that solution is inclusive. And the other point is that, you know, you really have to be transparent. You know, so if you're building an ML model, you know, and you got the algorithm behind the solution. So let's say, if, you know, Firas Hamza goes to the for a bank loan, you know, so they, you know, in the olden days, you know, you know, if I'm going to get that loan or not, you know, if they're going to reject my application, and usually if there is a human behind it, you know, yeah, you know, they rejected my application because of 1, 2, 3 reasons tops. Okay. Discrimination could be one of them, you know, which is, you know, you can say, hey, you know, that's discrimination. So, you know, it's very clear, and you can, you know, start yelling at them about that. So, but then when you have an algorithm behind it, you know, behind that software, you know, usually you have thousands of data points. So it becomes really hard to see why my loan application was rejected. You know, because it could be 1 out of 1,000 data points. So you really have to have that transparency behind that solution to really understand those, like, why my application got rejected. I want to know what's behind. That's why you have the data bias, you know, what kind of data sets they chose for that solution. You really need to look at it holistically and make sure they are accountable for that solution, and you have the guide rails in place, and not having just one scientist or data scientist pulling that data set that's going to train the ML model to build that solution.
Judy, may I just add on to what Firas
Sure.
said? And you know, this will expose some of our back and forth in our partnership with Aaron. But when Firas mentioned, like, the digitally native to your grandparent or whoever it may be, and then, you know, that kind of accountability of whatever system you're putting in place. And, you know, we had an example where one of our lead sales reps wasn't as comfortable in some of the technology, and so Aaron and I had some back and forth about, you know, Aaron's like, well, I think it works. I think, you know, it's user error. And I'm like, well, if it doesn't work for him, then it doesn't work. And so it was a really good example of how, in an ongoing way, it wasn't just about the technology solution, but then Aaron probably had, and their team invested more time in Zoom training, you know, where you're going in the systems and training and retraining and going over opportunities. So the idea of accountability for these systems and making sure that they work for the end user, and then being there and not just the technologist, but connecting it to the people and making sure that it works for them and that they're accountable to, you know, because you could look at a statement of work and say, Aaron could say, this delivered what we said. It has the capabilities and all the, you know, all the bullet points on the statement of work. But if we don't have the team using it, or they're frustrated, then it doesn't really work. And so having a partner and making sure there's accountability, that the partner is willing and invested in helping drive adoption through the organization has been really, really important for us. And it just, what Firas was sharing really you know, brought up that point in a real, because everything, you know, most of the stuff we're talking about is, hey, you just do this and it's great and it all works. And we all know in reality that's not what the journey looks like. And there are lots of back and forth and things where we fall down and make mistakes. And so that was one of those growing pains for us that we had to go through, and there another hour's worth of those. But I just wanted to share that based on what Firas had said.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because again, we are dealing with people, right? So if it were as simple as saying, here's the new tool, just use it, everybody would be on it by now, right? Everybody would have already completed this journey. We'd be in a whole different place. But, again, we're dealing with people, so we have to keep that in mind. So we've got just a few minutes left in the session. I don't see any questions yet in the chat, so if anybody has any, please post them or mark with your raised hand. We'd love to answer any additional questions if we're not covering the information that you were hoping for. And I'm going to ask a little bit different question as we start to close out in our last couple minutes. And this is one that's just kind of more of an interesting thing, and it may not have as much to do with this journey question as everything else, but what type of things are you reading or listening to right now in podcasts or reading in general that help you stay up to date on things like this? Or, like for you, Brian, maybe you're not reading as much about data and AI as you are about how to keep the business up to date. Just kind of curious. And you can say,
my answers may be a little bit different. So some of the most recent book I read was one that Aaron gave me called The Phoenix Project. Was as he might say, he has way more stakeholders from us than he would care to admit, or that I'm embarrassed to say. And so how do we prioritize work and organize work in a way that they can be more accountable to getting it done? And so it's been a great read, a painful one, the first half of that book, in terms of the types of issues that can be created if you don't have good workflows. And then some of the other things are more about, launching and running new businesses. The two other most recent books I read was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, which is just a fascinating read about, how he would drive to tracks and sell shoes out of the back of his car, and how the Nike logo, as iconic as it is, costs $25. And then the other one is This Will Never Work by the founder of Netflix. And so it's a great reminder that we all think that some of these businesses are overnight success, to realize that Netflix was founded in the 90s. And just what a journey it is to launch and start new businesses and to grow businesses. And just like this AI journey isn't set it up in 2 days, I think, as you said, Judy, it's a multi-year up and down. I want to quit. This is great. I want to quit, back and forth journey. And I think that's probably true of any sort of large organizational change initiative. But it takes time, it takes patience and commitment. But our experience has been that over time, it really bears fruit. And so I would encourage anyone, we talked about how to get started, just to take those initial steps. And it's made a world of difference for us.
Great. Thank you. Aaron, how about you?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And obviously, there is a large, precedent for me to stay up to date on all of the newest technologies that come out. And a lot of that's really, really exciting stuff. But, history is a really great teacher, right? And, the reality is that I think an important question to ask is not, what's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years, but what isn't going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. And so the reality is that, I would say that there's plenty of folks at Untitled that, have almost it seems like a real-time feed of every new thing that's coming out, that they just know about it, right? And for myself, I've dedicated a lot more time to looking at, history and what innovations looked like in the past, right? Like when the Romans invented concrete, what did that look like, right? How did that roll out, and you can learn so much because these patterns are very much the same, right? And so yes, you know, if something new comes out, you know, or Microsoft pushes a new feature to Azure Synapse, right? I have to know about that. And, you know, if you're working in the tools, you usually figure out that something new's there because maybe the whole interface changes and you're like, oh goodness, it's time to relearn this again, right? But at the same time, I think, you know, encouraging people to look at like, what did the technological revolution look like from, you know, the 80s and 90s, right, when we really started to get into networking, and like, how did that change business? And then, you know, if we look at things like, you know, the diffusion of raw compute, you know, where everybody can now have a personal computer, and then, you know, what networking did for the world, right? And then what, you know, a framework-based website like WordPress can do for the world. These consistencies are pretty much the same. I think the only difference is that it just happens faster now. But, you know, recognizing those patterns from history can really help you look forward and say, okay, I know change is inevitable, right? It's going to happen. So, you know, what were the preparations that the best companies made in order to really leverage that change in a meaningful way?
That's great. All right, Firas.
Yes, I got 3 minutes. You know, one of my favorite books is called The 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. Is a famous Israeli writer, and he's really popular in Silicon Valley. And his book talks about the AI revolution and the impact on humanity, and the lessons, back to Aaron's point, you know, the history lessons, and how it's going to impact us going forward. For example, you talk about equality and you know, the reskilling programs, and what is going to happen to people who will not adapt or will not going to have the ability to learn. And so it's a really great book, and talks about the you know, about what's going to encounter in the future from a philosophical point of view. The other book that I highly recommend, since I work in healthcare, is called Deep Medicine by Dr. Eric Topol. I'm a big fan of Dr. Eric Topol. He used to work at the Cleveland Clinic. But he talks about technology, and he's talking about AI, and you know, how there are several areas where AI is not replacing doctors, but it will help doctors, you know, by taking on these repetitive tasks, and you know, and how can, you know, really help humanity. And I saw personally, I saw how technology can help humanity. I worked with St. Jude Research Hospital, and I've been visiting them, and you see the kids at St. Jude Hospital really, you know, will very uplifting. And they use the Microsoft Cloud, you know, for their genomic research project, and you know, and they shared their pediatric cancer and data models, you know, with other hospitals as well, to see that impact, you know, the technology on humanity. It's really uplifting, and you know, and that's what we need when we think about technology. We need to think about the impact and the solutions that provide, you know, will push us forward together.
That's great. Well, thank you all very much for being a part of this panel. I found it very interesting hearing your stories and the things that you found important and impactful as you move along the AI journey. So I really appreciate your time and having you share this information. It looks like somebody else shared a book that they enjoy as well. That's out in the chat, and I'd encourage other people to share things that they'd like to on the chat. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.